Chapter 21, in which Kitty puts on a grand performance. The dinner is well underway in the mess, now improved by the notes playing on the Steinway, along with gifts singing. Turn off your light, Mr. Moon Man. Go and hide your face behind the clouds. Can't you see that couples want a spoon, man? 2 is company and 3's a crowd. When each little lad and lady find a spot so nice and shady, that's your cue to say good night, good night. And if they want a spoon, listen, Mr. Moon, be a sport and turn off your light. While Kitty leaned against the side of the Steinway, seated at the table were Cyril, Bugsy, Otis, and Isaac, eating. Cyril, still suspecting her, had hardly touched his meal. Even the smell of his stew did little to hinder his suspicions. In a quiet fury, he whispered to Bugsy, "I swear something's very off with that girl the captain has." "Why?" Bugsy murmured. "Is it because of the pink hair? Pink really isn't a natural hair color. Not just that. A few hours ago, while I was treating the captain, I suspect his scratches are claw marks, as if it's from a cat. Can't be from the cabin boys. The marks on the captain's arm are too big for an ordinary cat." Bugsy stared at Kitty, before turning back to Cyril. "What are you suspecting in that girl? Are you saying that she acts like some kind of cat?" "Haven't heard that one before." "It does sound like it, Bugsy," Cyril insisted. "I think the captain is hiding something about this Miss Felinis. You're not the only one. Women aren't supposed to be in ships anyway. What's so useful about them on board? They're only good at being housewives, preparing dinner after spending hours in the workplace. Not to mention raising children like dogs." Cyril's attention suddenly turns to the open door, and Fred came into the room, calling out, "Evening, all!" The crew turned and greeted back, "Evening, Captain." Quickly, Cyril turned and whispered to Bugsy, warning, "Mark my words, I will get to the bottom of this. It's not good for him hiding something from our crew, especially if it involves the opposite sex." He composed himself in time to see Fred walking over and sat between Bugsy and Cyril. Bugsy asked Fred, "How's your arm? Feeling any pain lately?" "It'll take a while to heal long after I head back to Moimo," Fred said. "And what about that girl? Think she's sorry?" "She has. It's best not to talk about it anymore, but I'll make sure she behaves for the rest of the expedition." Fred rises up and heads to the galley. As soon as Mr. Moonman comes to an end, Gift told Kitty, "Why don't you mingle with the crew, Kitty? Go sit in Fred's seat until he comes back." She shook her head.
"I don't think I can. It's best if I wait for him."
"Just go sit anywhere," he said. As soon as he swings into Oceana Roll, she walked to the table. She stood next to Isaac, who was drinking his mug of fine brewed sarsaparilla. Without looking at her, he asked, "Looking for someone to talk to, lass?"
"I appreciate it if you don't mind,"
she said.
"However, I'm actually nervous to be surrounded by a bunch of seamen."
He can't help but stifle a laugh. "What's the matter?" he asked. "You think someone would ever want to lay so much as a finger on you?"
"Haven't even thought about it,"
she swallowed. "They try to do that, and I'll take a swing at them myself," he said, rising up and walking around the table. Picking up a mug, he turns on the spigot at the front of the barrel, pouring some sarsaparilla into the mug, before giving it to her. "Here, have a swig," he said. "Always keep your head in your booze, and keep your wits about you, that's what I say." She looks down at the frothy liquid, curiously. "It's sarsaparilla," he said. "Go on, have a taste." Slowly, she drinks from her mug. It had a syrupy taste of vanilla, wintergreen, molasses, anise, licorice, cinnamon, honey, and sugar. That time, she didn't stop until she drank it all. "Well," he smiled, "what do you think?" She covers her mouth as she lets out a small burp. Then she let out a happy purr and stared off into the air.
I am profoundly stirred, she exclaimed. Never have I tasted something like that before.
He chuckles weakly. Glad to hear it, lass. Here. He refills her cup and gives it her. Have another one. I can see you and the crew are going to get along really well for the rest of the expedition. She shows no hesitation as she downs the sarsaparilla. Oh, come on, Isaac, Bugsy glared at him. Don't serve her any more of that stuff. She has to have something to eat. Go take her to the galley with Hector. I don't want her starving. She walked over and rubbed her face against his shoulder, letting out low purrs, unaware that this results in Cyril becoming more suspicious about this girl. Bugsy pushed her aside in disgust. What has gotten into you? He demanded. She laughed and cooed.
Jag har aldrig varit bättre. Tack för att du frågade.
I don't know what you're saying, but don't ever do that again or I'll thump you. Got it?
Ingen anledning. Jag blir arg. Bara en känsla av bekanta.
He turned to Isaac. What's her problem? What is she saying? I have no idea, Isaac shrugged. Must have been from the sarsaparilla. She gives her mug to him. Clearly she wanted more. He shook his head. Look, lass, don't get carried away with this stuff. Too much isn't good for you. I doubt she's planning on getting drunk from that, Bugsy scoffed. She turned to him.
Oh, you should never doubt what nobody's sure about.
He turned back to Isaac.
Now, will you or will you not let me have another round of this very refreshing, sweet-tasting sarsaparilla?
He sighed, knowing that there was no way of getting through to that girl. He refilled her mug and gives it back to her. Clearly, it was his fault she got hooked. I swear, it's like you're hooked on that stuff or something, he said. As soon as she drank, Gift began another tune. This time, she can't help but sing along and wave her arms up in the air.
Stormy the night and the waves roll high. Bravely the ship doth ride. Hark while the lighthouse bell's solemn cry rings o'er the sullen tide. There on the deck see two lovers stand, heart to heart beating and hand to hand. Though death be near, she knows no fear, while at her side is one almost dear.
Fred came back from the galley with a meal consists of broiled lobster with melted butter and a piece of garlic bread. He's pleased that Kitty got along with some of the crew who were still at the table. Good to see some merriment in her, he smiled as he sat back in his seat. Cyril shook his head. I don't think so, Captain. I still think there's something unusual about her. Fred frowned, leaning closer and glaring at him. You're still not being prickly about Miss Valinas, are you? He demanded. She just drank so much sarsaparilla and just rubbed her face against Bugsy's shoulder. I don't think that's regular behavior. Bugsy warned Fred. She does that to me again, and I'll rip off her ears. Now look, Fred snapped. I want you to be nice to Kitty. It'll only upset her this much. And the same goes to everyone, do you hear? She approached him and rubbed her face against his shoulder and laughing.
I hope we shall drink down all unkindness, she exclaimed. It provokes the desire, but it takes away the performance.
You see? Cyril frantically asked Fred. Qu'est-ce que ça vous dit? Nothing, Fred snapped. It tells me that she's harmless enough to have a good time on board. Cyril groaned and rose up, taking his plate with him. Unless something knocks some sense into you, don't expect to get a moment's rest. Then he stormed out of the galley. Fred rolls his eyes and takes her hand. Don't worry about him, Kitty, he said. I'll make sure he never gives you such a hard time again. Have a seat, and I'll give you some more sarsaparilla. He took her mug and goes to the barrel, refilling her cup through a spigot. She took no hesitation in drinking her fourth serving when he gave the mug back to her. The fourth makes her even more bonkers. She took a deep breath and slammed her mug down before she stood up onto the table. The remaining crew, even Fred, looked up as she cackled madly, making Giff stop playing. "What's gone into you, Kitty?" he asked.
"Gentlemen!" she shouted with a malicious smirk. "Gentlemen, or gentle-cats, if there are any, of course!"
She jumped off and turned to face the crew, leaving them in shock as she bowed.
"I, Captain Dapperpaws, have taken over this ship! If any of you dare to oppose me, Barker scum, you all form a line, and I shall paint the floor with your blood!"
Bugsy rose up, but Fred stopped him from reaching her. "Just watch, Bugsy," he warned. Hector barged into the room, demanding, "¿Qué está pasando aquí?" Kitty turns and points a finger at Hector.
"So!"
she shouted.
"You dare kidnap the Princess of Kataria once again, so you can force her to marry you!"
"Princess?" he asked, confused. "What are you talking about? I haven't even heard of Kataria." She snatched a knife that Bugsy was using and points it at Hector, backing him away. "Hey!" he barked. "Just play along, Hector," Fred insisted. "¿Qué quieres decir con seguir el juego, estúpido? She's got a knife pointing at me!"
"No!"
she shouted in triumph.
"Look upon your death at last, Captain One-Eye, and may your blade grow dull and shatter!"
She lunges towards Hector, pointing the knife towards him, but he gets out of the way. "Hey!" he shouted. "¿Cuál es tu problema, maldita sea?" Fred picked up Otis's knife and gives it to Hector. "Here, just play along." Before Hector can say anything, he can hear her scream,
"How about you, devil?"
He turned to see her coming towards him. Quickly, he blocks her with his knife. Then, they immediately cross knives like swords. From his seat, Otis can see the illusion and is fascinated. However, Bugsy's heart was beating wildly with shock.
"Prolonging the inevitable, are you?"
she taunted.
"You've been doing that for far too long!"
"Oh, to hell with it!" Hector groaned to himself and jabs out, his knife slashing. She grabs his arm and slams him against the sideboard table. He turned to find her sticking her knife under his arm. Then he fell to the floor. "Oh, gracias a Dios se acabó," he muttered. She turned and tossed her knife aside, proclaiming,
"Gentlemen, Captain One-Eye, my most mortal enemy, is no longer among the living, and his entire crew massacred. Never again will he darken any door or strike fear within your hearts. Therefore and henceforth, in conclusion and furthermore, ergo and etc. and ipso facto, from this day forth, and throughout the seas, with the princess by my side, we shall reign together as king and queen of cats."
She knelt down and bows her head. Fred, Giff, and the remaining crew clapped, except Bugsy, who was just as annoyed than ever. Hector got up to his feet and pointed at Fred. "Just be glad I'm doing you a favor," he snapped, before heading back to the galley. She got up to her feet and found Fred clapping. "That was great, Kitty," he proclaimed. "A great performance. By the way, what's this talk about Dapper Paws?"
"I have no idea," she smiled. "But that sure was fun, wasn't it?"
That's when Bugsy rose up from his seat. "Well, I say that's enough childish nonsense for one night," he snapped.
"What, Bugsy?" she asked. "Aren't you going to eat?"
"Too bad I have no interest," he said. "No thanks to you." He heads out, muttering to himself, "I can't believe I'm stuck on this boat with this crazy girl." Fred placed a hand on Kitty's shoulder. "He'll get over it," he insisted. "After all, he's in this expedition for the money. Here, go sit next to Mr. McGinty." He turns to Giff. "Another number!" Just as Giff begins playing Down on the Brandywine, she sat next to Otis. "Well now, seeing you all vibrant like that, you do remind me of my daughter when she was young, even though I rarely see her," he smiled.
Oh, really?
She asked.
How good to hear that.
She's very imaginative at times. In fact, I'm looking forward to see my daughter again, since it is my last expedition.
It is? How long have you been working at sea?
40 years, I'm afraid. When I get back to Morimo, I was hoping for a long, tranquil time before I finally show up at death's door. He pulls out his daguerreotype and hands it to her. She opens it to find a picture of his wife and daughter.
Oh, you were married, I see,
she asked.
And your daughter, what is she like?
She's very bright, smart, and curious, he said. She loves dogs. She even loves horses. She'll ride them for hours pretending to be an equestrian or jockey.
I would like to meet her, if you let me.
Of course I'll take you, he chuckled. I'll see to that when we get back to the harbor. What about you? I would like to know you more. A nice, merry girl like you. Fred stepped in. I just found her in the Crimson Pig back at the harbor. And about who she is, you could say that she's complicated. Oh, I see, Otis said. You're telling me that she doesn't want to tell me about herself. Essentially, Mr. McGinty. One wonders what the world is coming to sometimes. Surely everything depends on what she can do in her life, Fred? Kitty's eyes widen.
Rightfully so, Otis,
she said.
It is my destiny to make a living in Cadona like I'm something novel.
Who said? Otis asked, leaning closer.
My father. Before I left home, I've been taught how to do some good in this world.
Would you?
I've been living in the city for nearly a fortnight. Of course, things could get a lot jumbled. My father said to me, they could be a great people they desire to be. They only want the light to show the way. I couldn't be happier to have a purpose in this world.
I'm actually looking forward on what you can do, he smiled. No matter what the cost, it was worth everything. That's when Fred stepped in again. If you wouldn't mind, I think it's best if Kitty should call it a day. She's got to get her sleep. Otis nodded and shook her hand. Looking forward to see you again, Kitty.
I think I may,
she smiled. Fred takes her hand, but she brushes off and walks to Giff, making him stop playing. Yes? He asked.
I want to stay in your cabin and stare at the forecastle,
she said. Fred calls out to her. If that's what you want, I'll get you some blankets and stuff. Come on! Don't worry about being alone, Giff said. Just remember that I got Aloysius for company. I'll meet you there. She nods and follows Fred out on deck, making their way to Giff's cabin.
Just be glad I didn't give myself away back there,
she frowned. I know you didn't, Kitty, he said. I'm very pleased with you.
Too bad I'll be forced to face the most perilous part of the expedition. Keeping my identity a secret.
Just 8 more days. You trust me, Kitty. I'll see that you do. He opens the door and pushed her inside. Now you wait here while I fetch you a mattress, a pillow, and some spare blankets.
And my luggage?
She asked. Yes, with your clothes. Now stay here. He shuts the door. She sat on the side of the bed, taking off her hat, which exposed her ears. She can see Aloysius on the desk, staring at her.
I guess you wouldn't mind if you see me like this, and no one else,
she said. That's when the cat began to speak to her. You haven't forgotten about that giant fish in the hold, have you? She shook her head.
I would never forget something like that, even with the fish piling around it. Danger is unavoidable unless the fish returns to the sea. Your owner has told me not to reason with Fred again, but I had to, and yet he still doesn't listen.
Then it really is unavoidable, he stated, while lowering his head. I take your word for it, Kitty. There's hardly any time to waste now, is there? It may take a while to haunt him. What's going to cost his arrogance is the life of someone else, and many more. Now put your hat back on. My owner will be coming here any minute.
It was most unfortunate for me that I'm on this boat for one purpose, Aloysius,
she agreed, putting her hat back on, covering her ears again.
I wouldn't want anyone on board suffering the consequences. They'll be thanking me for making them see reason. Of course, living on shipboard was taking more than a little getting used to.
I wouldn't be concerned if you ever tell anyone that I'm able to talk. Only those who aren't human can understand a word they've said, like you. Soon enough, Fred and several sailors came into the room, placing a mattress against the opposite wall for her. Shortly after, he hands her a pillow, some blankets, and her luggage. Giff will be coming back soon, he said. But I need you up and about in the morning. We'll be hauling in another load.